Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 13th, 2023. Time for another everything that we bring to you. It's not a new month or a new year, but it's a new other bunch of things. New week, anyway. November 13th, the NAFTA refrigerator calendar and everything else in the world tells me Veterans Day was, of course, the 11th, as it always is. I was wondering last night whether do we not do a Monday thing like Veterans Day observed and everybody gets the day off because the holiday was on Saturday? Or does everybody, I don't know, everybody's ignoring it for whatever reason. Okay, I mean, they weren't ignoring Veterans Day necessarily. They weren't necessarily honoring Veterans Day, though. The big story of the weekend, gee whiz, Trump went crazy because he's an idiot and a would-be dictator. And it was dictator as well, by the way. I might as well point that out. Marcy Wheeler driving herself absolutely insane. I mean, well, you know, so it's an easy thing to do, to drive Marcy crazy. But she's pointing out, in the face of every other trend of covering Donald Trump, pointing out to everybody that, the hot story in town these days is, hey, Trump might later go crazy if he was returned to power. We'll have to examine the delicate phrasing issues that I viewed in reading the story. But the story of the weekend, right? Trump will do terrible things if he is allowed to be president again. And Marcy banging her head against the wall, reminding everybody it's not a prospective thing. This is a past, present, and future story. He's been doing these things. He's already did these things. You watched him do them. I don't understand why you're not covering this as a continuity story, not a, hey, watch out what might be coming story. But I guess I'm glad they're raising an alarm. And so there was a real progression, I think, going into the weekend and then coming out of the weekend in the way at least some of the newspapers were, they're sort of kind of coming around and how they cover him. I guess that's the big story. I got another big one, by the way. There are many. And this one I picked up from reading Greg's morning roundup, i.e. the abbreviated pundit roundup. The bad news today, not so much, oh, well, gee whiz, we might have a dictator in the United States. Oh, gee whiz, we might persecute everybody but white Christian evangelicals. Well, bad. Oh, gee whiz, war globally. Choose your theater of operations. But also, Greg Dworkin won't be here today. I mean, that is a global scale development. But nothing bad, routine doctor thing. You got to go to get your checkup, whatever. We all do it, right? And if you haven't been, you should be. If we're holding you up from getting your regular checkup, listen to the podcast. We encourage you to visit with your practitioner regularly. I am a little bit behind on, I got to go to the eye doctor and I got to go to the dentist. These are the things I have to schedule for myself. And I let my show get in the way of it, but I can't listen to the podcast later. I have to do the show. So that's my big trouble in the world. Okay, so another one that I picked up from Greg's roundup, I'll share with you later. But the weekend happenings. Let's see. First, there was, I think, the I'm trying to remember. Was it two separate rounds of different stories? Essentially, I mean, we've been reading for a while now, and the New York Times has been doing this as a series of. I guess the closest that they've been able to come so far to meeting Jay Rosen's request, demand, insistence that people look at the stakes of the presidential election rather than the horse race, not the, anyway, you get the idea. But they're doing a pretty good job. The stories themselves are pretty revealing. That's good. The headlines have left something to be desired. So anyway, over the weekend, lots of crazy threats from Trump about how he would essentially throw the law and the Constitution out the window to effect Stephen Miller's, as it turns out, Stephen Miller's agenda of terror against immigrants, among other things. Oh, right. There were 2 rounds. The 2 rounds lately of the story have been the revenge tour, which, I guess he has revenge against immigrants in mind as well. But the revenge tour against certain named political enemies, and including lawyers that he's hired that didn't do a very good job for him somewhere along the line, and there are plenty of those. And then the second round of him was, well, here's our specific plans about sweeping roundups and raids all across the country. The idea being Stephen Miller's ultimate fantasy. I'm going to round up every immigrant, legal or illegal, who's brown enough to offend me in this country, and put them in camps and then kick them out of the country to God knows where. But these ideas of we'll just use the military because it's theirs to use however they see fit, and they'll round everybody up. A lot of grandiose plans going on, and a lot of times it's the grandiose scale of these things that trip them up. But of course, that was the idea of the one and the 1-2 punch. We'll arrest all of the deep state, i.e. anybody who would resist any of my stupid orders off the cuff, and we'll get them out of the way, and we'll replace them with loyal idiots who will do anything I say, and then I will order idiotic things to happen. So it's a bit of a 1-2 punch, and like as I said, some realization now that he's a super dangerous guy, and they're willing to put it in some of the headlines. Now, the one that I guess sent everybody over the edge, headline-wise anyway, was his Veterans Day speech. That's what I was telling you about, the fact that how he used Veterans Day. And he's used all of these holidays, some solemn, some celebratory, whatever, to do this over the years. What was it? What was the holiday he was celebrating where he was saying, happy whatever it is, even to all the haters and losers, they can't help that they're effed up. It might have been Christmas for all I know. This one was Happy Veterans Day, to hell with the Constitution you were defending, F everybody, something. But he used this speech to, of course, call out, both in the speech and later on his social media thingy that he keeps for himself, that the whole thing would be very related to his revenge tour. He was going to use his power to root out the vermin, as he put it, in this country. That was, of course, communists, Marxists, and Marxist communists, and communist Marxists as well, but also communists. And this, that, and the other thing, plus also the leftist thugs, whoever they may be, as defined by me, whatever I do. It's just a little reminder, by the way, that, again, as we said on Friday, this does have continuity not only back to his first term, to his first election campaign, but to the last Republican administration, that instead of saying we're looking for radical leftist thugs, they were looking for terrorist operatives or non-uniformed combatants, unlawful combatants. And that's defined, however we want to. And people thought we were crazy for raising the alarm and saying there's no parameters to this. The Republican president at the time, George W. Bush, can declare anybody he doesn't like to be an unlawful enemy combatant and get rid of them. And we should probably have some guardrails about that. But everybody said, what's he going to do? Just declare domestic political enemies to be unlawful combatants and throw them in jail and persecute them, or sick the Department of Justice or Department of Homeland Security on them, audit them with the IRS? Come on. It's the President of the United States. Everyone will see it. And then when the newspapers discover it, look out. Dramatic music maybe. Because they'll set things right, because they'll print it. Ooh, scary. Which actually kind of brings me to one of my reactions to these stories over the weekend was, I'm glad that finally by the end of the weekend, the newspapers were kind of getting the hang of what was going on here and calling it out. But I don't know how much more we expect them to do. I mean, that's all they can do is call it out. And it would be valuable because the idea is then it would be seen as a call to action by the rest of the country, and they would all say, we can't tolerate this, and they would take certain actions, not just telling pollsters, oh, geez, I don't think I would vote for that guy. But I don't know. I mean, ultimately, buy pitchforks or something like that, maybe. And ever since Charlottesville, they've restocked on the torches over at Home Depot, so you could get some of those, too. You have to, I guess, start talking about that sort of stuff openly because, if this guy's going to be using the dictator talk, then we got to have talks about how you rid yourselves of dictators, because it's not at the ballot box most frequently where those stories end, let's say. Anyway, so yeah, he calls out the vermin, and then he's going to, what did he say? Oh, here we are. We pledge to you, it's right in front of me now because of social media. We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, I don't have the energy to do his voice in this anymore, fascists and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections, which, hello, that's you. And then, of course, the New York Times was the most disappointing of the headlines that I saw by far, which was Trump takes Veterans Day speech in a very different direction, which is true, but is, of course, understating the case. Now, there were others. And Forbes magazine at one point, I wish I had them in front of me. I should have them in front of me because they were pretty remarkable. And I guess if I open up the alternative version of my blue sky social media, whatever the heck you call it, then I think we don't have to scroll too far back to find the rest of them. Well, let's see. Oh, and the Washington Post chimed in too, and had a good one. Is this it? There we are. Forbes. Right. Jay Rosen found it, as well as a couple of other people. Let's see. I think I first saw Joshua Holland find it and call it out in my timeline. He may have been the 800th in the world to do it. But then Jay Rosen very shortly thereafter. Trump compares political foes to, quote, vermin on Veterans Day. It's actually worse if you do it on Veterans Day. Echoing Nazi propaganda. Not the thing you typically do for Veterans Day, but then again, most of the World War II veterans are dead or probably weren't listening to the speech or something like that. And maybe there was no figuring going on. He was just going to say what he wanted to say regardless. Probably had no understanding of what he was doing or saying being such a terrible thing, because after all, whatever, there's stories about him keeping the book of Hitler's speeches by his bed, which he then denied or said, well, I never read it anyway, I just something, and he just happened to echo it. And I'm sure he didn't write the speech. He may or may not have decided he wanted to use that line. I'm sure it was handed to him. Marcy was pointing out today that one of the reasons you're seeing so many stories about it, about the plans, like they're being so open about the plans, might be revealed by the fact that she had 9 screenshots of Stephen Miller himself retweeting the story. He was very proud of the story. He's trying his best to propagate the story in the press. This is a proud moment for him. So, yeah, he's driving it. So, okay, they were the first ones to drop the other N-word, Nazi, in the headlines. And then back to the other version of Blue Sky here. If I can find it anywhere, I think if I scroll, I'll scroll back again in my own timeline. There was, yes, the Washington Post went along with, came with, Trump calls political enemies, quote, vermin, echoing dictators Hitler, Mussolini. So that was pretty specific too. Now, on the other hand, there were other things like the New York Times opinion column, a Trump-Biden rematch is the election we need, which also struck me as sort of dumb, let's say, and, maybe not the best continuation of a theme. All right. Well, we have lots to say about that, more commentary, things to read, things to get to. I wanted to check in on Justice's notes here because he, usually gives you some good hints about other hot topics that are happening in the morning. And he's just sent me a third with a link, so it might be important, sort of a breaking news story. But I'll get there. I'm going to build up to it by saying, let's say, first, I like to read the hints he gives. Sometimes I don't know the story. Let's see. Okay, of course, there we are. bringing back the icebox baby gulags for Trump's second term, right? That was the announcement of the big anti-immigrant plan that we were talking about that led to the vermin speech, but I don't know that he only meant for us to take the immigrants as the targets of his ire there. He was also broadly speaking of all his political enemies. And then MTG, Murdery Trader Green, of course, called Boebert a garden tool. Wink, wink. So as it turns out, now this is interesting because ordinarily everybody knows what the hint is. You're supposed to, a garden tool, get it? A hoe, right? That's the funny thing. But it occurred to me that maybe, given the Beetlejuice vaping incident the other day, like maybe she called her a weed whacker. I was just wondering if that was what might be. That would be great. So my mind went there because I thought that would be even funnier. But a hoe, all right. Well, okay. That's the everybody's gonna get that one, but I don't know, weed whacker or else garden weasel. That's not really as funny, but weed whacker, that's pretty good. So that probably wasn't it, but little tip to Murdery Trader, you might want to try that one out on the road a little bit, see if it catches fire. All right, let's see. Oh, there was another hint before the new article. Let's see. Trump brands. Let's see. Trump brands. Because Joe doesn't have any for Hunter to profit. Okay, yes. More of the accusations that they're coming up with in their effort to somehow, find justification for impeaching Joe Biden, which doesn't exist. Okay. I don't know if there's a new development on that front, but always worth watching. All right, let me see what's going on here. Breaking could be just regular attempted car theft. But still concerning when crack shot agents can't hit their target. Maybe even a little bit of gun failure. What's going on here? HuffPost covering this one. Secret Service agents protecting Biden. Let's see. Shoot Naomi Biden's car somehow? Oh dear. Let's go find out what this is about. Secret Service agents protecting Biden's granddaughter. Open fire amid car break-in. Oh boy. One of 3 agents out with Naomi Biden on Sunday opened fire at people breaking a window of the unmarked Secret Service vehicle. No one was struck, officials said. So, yes, a little troublesome. It sounds like, probably routine car theft, an unmarked car. Bad luck, I guess, for the perpetrators that they chose. The car to break into was from the Secret Service. Yow. On the other hand, could be something else too, right? If this is the car that she rides in, who knows what they were up to. Anyway, then part 2 of the story, the crack shots missed, which could lead to a discussion once again of gun fail. And the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun, or is a good guy with a gun, but the good guy with the gun has to be able to hit the bad guy with the gun in order to stop him, generally speaking. Although sometimes in not this situation, but in other situations, sometimes just having good guys with guns shooting at bad guys with guns is enough to make the bad guys with guns stop the bad guys with guns by shooting themselves. There is that possibility, but it doesn't happen here. Let's quickly find out what the hell's going on here. Secret Service agents protecting President Joe Biden's granddaughter opened fire after 3 people tried to break into an unmarked Secret Service vehicle. They were probably all doing it all at once, not taking turns, waiting in line. You try next. But, 3 people trying to break in. Let's see. So, okay, that according to a law enforcement official. They won't say who, or they don't say who. I don't know. Local cops, Secret Service, no idea. Anyway, this according to the Associated Press. The agents assigned to protect Naomi Biden were out with her in the Georgetown neighborhood late Sunday night when they saw 3 people breaking a window of the parked and unoccupied SUV. The official said the official could not discuss details of the investigation publicly and spoke to the AP on Monday on condition of anonymity. Okay. Maybe you shouldn't discuss it at all, but all right. I have a feeling that they need to get those stories out, but then they're like, we're not quite ready, but the press is onto it already. Go brief them, but tell them you want anonymity even though you're the official spokesperson. I don't know. That's just a guess. But this is the real stuff. One of the agents opened fire, but no one was struck by the gunfire, which means bullets were flying around Georgetown. The Secret Service said in a statement, they didn't say about bullets flying around Georgetown. That was me. The 3 people were seen fleeing in a red car, so they already had a car. That wasn't the point. And the Secret Service said it put out a regional bulletin to Metropolitan Police to be on the lookout for it. All units, there's a red car. Okay, I'm sure the bulletin was a little bit more detailed than that. There is an embedded tweet from the Secret Service spokesperson, Anthony Guglielmi. And, well, it says about what you expect a Secret Service release to say, because it is the Biden administration and they, generally speaking, have adult professionals taking care of this stuff. That will become clearer why that comment, maybe when we get to the big story from today that I wanted to read you. Washington has seen a significant rise in the number of carjackings and car thefts this year. Police have reported more than 750 carjackings this year and more than 6,000 reports of stolen vehicles in the district. U.S. Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas was carjacked near the Capitol last month by 3 armed assailants. Ooh, the M.O. is the same. Who stole his car but didn't physically harm him. We did hear that story. I don't know that we talked about it on the air, though. Yeah, that wasn't great. Violent crime in Washington, is this what we're going to focus on? Okay, fine. It's also been on the rise this year, up more than 40% compared with last year. Yargle Bargo Biden. In February, U.S. Representative Angie Craig of Minnesota was assaulted in her apartment building, suffering bruises while escaping serious injury. Interesting that they chose this to make the second half of the article about that. But, okay. Well, it's all true, I guess, and something. So there you go. That's an interesting piece of breaking news. And, yeah, why did they shoot at the, maybe they had weapons in the car and they were protecting it. They didn't want these guys to break in and get the weapons. It would be interesting if they apprehend these people, whether they knew it was a Secret Service car and they were breaking in because they knew they might be able to get some guns out of it, or did they just like the car, or did they just taking a shot at, this car is big, there's probably something good in it, or did they know it was Naomi Biden's car and they wanted to do something related to that? I don't know. Probably not, though. But yeah, more likely they had an inkling that they might come away with something valuable, if not a gun. But if they knew it was a Secret Service car, that would be problematic. I mean, it would have had, identifiable plates. And it may, I don't know, an unmarked car. They probably don't have Secret Service plates. I don't know. Well, we'll see if there's any further developments in that story, but, not top priority. We'll say that. Okay. So let's see. Not quite break time yet, but, we'll wait until after the break to bring you the story that I wanted to, focus in on. I guess other stories that we might be able to fit in before our break. News from the presidential race, if you think there is one or care. It's from the Republican side. You've probably heard it by now. Tim Scott has dropped out of the presidential race. What can I tell you? All the sad donors who sent their hard-earned money to him, and he didn't contest a single primary. But he had a tough road to how does that phrase go? Actually, row, you would think, is what you would be hoeing, not the other kind of hoeing, but people say, people screw things up all the time. I shouldn't be listening to them. Anyway, he had a difficult path to walk, let's say. A person of color running supposedly seriously for the presidential nomination. And certainly anybody who isn't Donald Trump. I mean, he's a person of color too. The color is orange. But, everybody had an uphill push against Trump. But, yeah, row. Okay, thanks, Mom. It would be row. You could hoe a road. It just doesn't make any damn sense. That's another one. Towing the line. I think I know which tow we're talking about, but I was wondering one day whether it might not be equally applicable to TOW, towing a line like a rope line, like, you know what I mean? That's, when it's used in a slightly different sense, or like you're pitching in on a team effort versus lining up correctly for competition of some kind, towing that line. I don't know. Anyway, I have all sorts of interesting and stupid and mostly wrong insights into our various idioms. We don't have to express going beyond the pale now, do we? Okay, we've done that on the air before. So Tim Scott is out. He was never going anywhere. Oh my God, OMG, a black guy running for the nomination on the Republican side. It's not the first time that that's happened, but the same thing happened every time. The Republicans said, yeah, no, thank you. I mean, that was nice of you to come by and prove that we don't have a racist bone in our bodies, but it's time for you to go now, a year in advance of the next election. Okay, so there's that. Digest it. Sit with it for a little while. Okay, we're done. And Tim Scott, we hardly knew ye, and that's okay. We kind of liked it that way. Let's see. Other stories. Oh, yes, right. I did mention the very dumb New York Times opinion piece under the headline, "A Trump-Biden rematch is the election we need." I guess the writer here, sorry, we're going to have to call you out here, Carlos Lozada. I don't know Carlos Lozada. Maybe we should get familiar. Thinks that this will be, I don't know what, not curative really, but that we need to have a final showdown between these two because something in the country needs to realize make a final statement against authoritarianism. I see where he's going with it, but what would the rematch that we really need is Trump versus, well, it's not even a rematch, it's the first match, Trump versus wood chipper, because we can't have there being a 50% chance or even a 40% chance that he would be elected president. It's not worth it. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's a tough road on which we hoe, I guess. Yes, so continuing to have a discussion about that with my mom and other listeners as well. Yes, I mean, it never made any sense, and I just understood. I know people do say that, a tough road to hoe, like that. Why are you thinking at all about what hoeing would be about, and like why would anybody hoe a road? You wouldn't. It would be pointless. You don't want to plant anything there. I mean, are they giving it any thought at all? I think they just mishear it and they figure that's it. And they're not farmers. They're not thinking about what hoeing is. They just say these things. And, I don't know why people say it at all, but then it gets stuck in my head and I obsess over something like this. Now you wouldn't, like I said, hoe a road because it would be ridiculous to do so. The problem is that, one of the things that would be one of the reasons you wouldn't hoe a road is how tough it must be to do such a thing. I mean, even a dirt road would be hard-packed dirt. That would be very difficult. It is a tough road to hoe. And that's why we don't hoe roads. Go hoe a row, you idiot. And then, I don't know. I'm not certain why that's on my mind. Athena had the same thought, although actually was laughing at she must have come in the middle of our discussion of not the other kind of hoeing. What are you talking about? How dare you? And, yes, that's right. But hoeing a road would also be tough. That's true. And as I had pointed out to her, but, the other kind of hoeing could plausibly and very frequently does at least start out on a road. I'm just saying there's reasons to consider alternatives in all of this. Okay. So let's see. Okay. My mom's back with more comments. You have to hear them because what else am I going to do with it? Oh, yes. Right. Yes. Well, people say the wrong things all the time. Okay. Oh, yes. Right. That's true. And I don't want to embarrass anybody, but, I've run into that. I've seen, let's see. What was I keep thinking, I don't know. There are familiar phrases where people, screw these things up all the time and just hear the wrong thing. And it's not just song lyrics. Okay. There's serious news here, people. Mom, what are you doing? You're getting me off track here. So, it's not your fault. But, you're there, right? So, we'll point at you. Okay. So there's some serious news this morning and I must, share it with you. But, by the way, I had just read you the headline of the Trump-Biden was a election rematch. Do you want to hear that? You should go read that. It's a little dopey, but, I don't know. Maybe the headline is a problem, but the whole thing seems, I don't know. I guess it's maybe for the moderates in the world who think that an election would settle this score we have with Trump. I mean, the problem, as I view it, of course, is it doesn't really matter to Trump what the outcome of the election is because he'll just assume that he won or claim that he won, and the rematch is not a rematch that we need because there's a party to this rematch who will insist that, the match itself doesn't matter so much as he should be able to reclaim power. Although, before I proceed on to the other story I wanted to share with you, that reminds me, I wanted to go back to the New York Times, story on, I guess, even the one with the bad headline. I think it's the one that it came from where they decided that they were just going to treat it as, golly, that's a different direction to take a Veterans Day speech in. They, I don't know if it was the vermin one or I think it actually was the first one about political enemies, but they were putting it this way. They were describing what was likely to happen in a second Trump administration, as is the focus of all these things. And they started off right in the beginning. I'm going to have to scroll back in social media again to find how I set this aside. It's too bad. I don't know. Pocket not arranged properly here, but there we are. All right. The New York Times piece, I still have to scroll back to find the thing exactly, but started out by, not by saying, as is frequently done with stories like this, where they say, I think it is it's the first of the stories of the weekend, the New York Times piece, not the vermin speech one, but the sweeping raids, giant camps, and mass deportations, right, inside Trump's 2025 immigration plans. And the subheader reads, if he regains power, Donald Trump wants not only to revive some of the immigration policies criticized as draconian during his presidency, but expand and toughen them. And, the rest of the subheader, they could expand and toughen their language, describing his language of expanding and toughening immigration policies, because it's more than it's not about being tough or strong. It's about ignoring the law, being unlawful and unconstitutional. But it was an important, I don't know whether they intended it or not, but it was very subtle that they begin this by saying, if he regains power, Donald Trump will do all these things. Usually these articles begin, if reelected, or if returned to the White House or whatever it is, they couch it in terms of, oh, well, this is what will happen if Trump wins the election. And this is an opportunity if they want to take it. I don't know if this was their intention, but an opportunity for pointing out that Donald Trump doesn't care how he returns to power, just that he returned to power. And it's an important distinction to say, as between if he wins the election, he will do this, versus, well, what if he doesn't win the election and seizes power or convinces people that he should be awarded power, whatever route it is, but he doesn't win and presses his case anyway. And now in light of January 6th, we actually have to consider such things. It's usually like, well, we say if he's elected because that's the way it works in this country. But now that that's no longer the way it works in this country, or very nearly wasn't anyway, it's certainly not the way it works that you can assume that the loser of the election will just say, well, that's it. I'm not the president. That's over, at least when Donald Trump is the nominee, which is why we don't need that rematch. Thank you very much, Carlos. But that was important to me. If he regains power, by whatever means, certainly not by re-election, but it really wouldn't matter to Donald Trump. And he may just be interested in implementing this program, whether he wins election or not. So I thought that was pretty important and a subtle hint. And then maybe, they didn't pick up on it when they finished the weekend by reporting that he gave such an unusual Veterans Day speech versus how other people treated it. Okay, so once again, all right, now I have to transition over. I believe you've probably all read this story or seen it discussed. I mean, it's important and we should probably comb through it at one point, but it will take all day long, maybe 2-3 days to pick through each one of these stories, and that'll occupy the entirety of the week. I want to share one that hasn't been as widely discussed yet because I guess it probably just went to print today. But keep this one in mind. Keep this story in mind, these orders that he says he's going to be issuing. Then, of course, the vermin story and how it doesn't matter to me that I sound like Hitler. I'm intentionally sounding like Hitler. And this whole story, sweeping raids, giant camps, mass deportations, right? This is a declaration that he will act unlawfully and unconstitutionally, and that's, obviously super dangerous. And again, if the intention is to start out, this is going to be our day one position that we're going to do this. And then remember, in conjunction with the earlier reporting of the revenge tour plans, that literally on day one, on Inauguration Day, he would invoke the Insurrection Act and call out the military to put down the demonstrations, which he, at this point, is just anticipating will occur on Inauguration Day. Now, again, let me just remind you, now, he's probably right that there will be protests against him no matter how he returns to power, however that may happen. But it's also somewhat suspect, right? I'm going to have the Insurrection Act ready to go because I anticipate large enough demonstrations against my return to power that we're going to need the military. And either that means I understand that I'm the most divisive and unpopular person ever to be reelected, or that 50% plus of the country will not be convinced that I'm entitled to this power and will therefore protest it because I lost the election and have seized power nonetheless through whatever means, whether that be an outright coup or forging electoral certificates. And I don't know how they would get. I mean, there's no reason to believe, of course, that Vice President Harris would recognize those certificates, but through whatever measures, right? Whether it's somehow befouling the electoral count in some other way, such that there was things called into question and they sent the question back to the House and the Senate, and the House were to vote because it's Republican controlled to recognize the objection. At that point, the Senate probably Well, it'll be the new Senate. So depending on how the elections go, both the House and the Senate will be new. But if they're just maybe rolling the dice. Well, if they're in Republican hands, we'll just declare something different and try and overrule the vice president, whether it's something like that, or it's just outright seizing power, or they try and, befoul the vote so that there's no one has a electoral majority and then throw it to the House of Representatives to vote by state, whatever the methodology is. He's already anticipating and has a plan for, well, this is how I'll get rid of the demonstrators who are against my seizing power. That too, an important thing. And so again, by way of transition to this next story, they're kind of willing to do anything, right? And they forged electoral college certificates. And I mean, I feel like I spent almost the entirety of the Trump administration telling you guys every time it happened, right? Just the declaring, the exclamation, right? What is it? Interjection. In fact, going back to my Schoolhouse Rock days of Trump and paperwork, man, although that's not an interjection, really. Man, maybe, is the interjection. But anyway, but I used to say that all the time. Trump and paperwork, man. Check the paperwork with Trump on everything. Never believe paperwork you've been handed by Donald Trump or one of his flunkies. There's a very good chance it's a forgery, for one thing, or it's just full of lies. Or as Greg would put it if he were here today.
That's bullshit.
Exactly. And so he would, you have to be wary of this. And I mean, I thought down to the level of, if you watch enough C-SPAN, you see that every once in a while when the White House sends paperwork back to, or initiates paperwork with the folks on Capitol Hill, and it shows up and the doorkeeper says, Mr. Speaker, a message from the President of the United States, it's a veto message or a declaration of some kind, or whatever it is, when the paperwork arrives there, it's announced and brought in, and that the normal routine way of handling those things is the Congress assumes that it is, in fact, a message from the President of the United States and treats it accordingly, even if they have a particular contempt for it, whoever the president may be. But they always treat it as a message from the President of the United States, and I thought maybe that they should not. Who knows who these messages are coming from? And honestly, all of the verification systems that are normally there so that you can just make the assumption that it is a message from the President of the United States generally are ignored these days, but they go through them so that you can tell the difference between a real message from the President and a fake one. And the Trump guys, maybe they don't. They cut corners. And that's one of the ways that you end up with paperwork that you can't be sure whether it really came from the President of the United States or not. Or even if it did purportedly come from him, did it come properly from him? If you forge election certificates, you could be forging anything. Did Donald Trump nominate Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, any of them, to the Supreme Court? It is said that he did. But did he? I don't know. And I don't know whether it matters or not once the Senate has acted. But to me, I was like, that I'm going to take those papers. I'm going to say, Mr. Speaker, although they wouldn't go to the House, they would go to the Senate, those things. But at any rate, Mr. President, as they would call the President pro tem, there, a message from the President of the United States. Maybe, allegedly, purportedly, I don't know. It says it nominates so-and-so to the Supreme Court. I don't know whether he really did it or not. What am I talking about? Not just the team that forged electoral college certificates. Electoral college certificates. That's crazy. But other things too. There's a story in Vanity Fair today, which I read earlier, and so it might think I'm not allowed to read it again. I'm not really sure. Opens just fine. It is an excerpt from Jonathan Karl's latest book, which means we are once again in a position of reading some startling bit of historical news that we wish we had known at the time, but that has come out in a book. But I think Jonathan Karl anticipates that and points out somewhere in the text, the preamble. How would you describe it? It's a preamble, let's say, to the story. Is it preambulatory text? Is that right? No, I don't know. Anyway, fooling around with the language today. But he does acknowledge, I understand that you all, are rightfully concerned about these things that only come out in books. I just learned the extent to which this story presents itself as such an outrage. There was a sense at the time that there was something wrong, but we didn't know how much was wrong, and the extent of the wrongness has become evident in this particular space of time in between my first book and my second book. So I can't be blamed for bringing it to, I don't know. You can take that for what it's worth. Here's the news. Now, this headline, it's interesting that they chose, well, okay. Here's the headline. It grabbed my eye right away because of how often I've told you guys. Trump and paperwork, man. It was a big deal back in the Twitter days, and I even made up a hashtag for it that nobody understood. Nobody seemed to make any sense of it. But I just, Trump and paperwork, man. But a few of you followed along over the years and figured out what the hell we were talking about. So here's the headline in Vanity Fair. It starts with a quote. "You're telling me that thing is forged?" Unquote. The inside story of how Trump's, quote, body guy tried and failed to order a massive military withdrawal. In one excerpt of his new book, Tired of Winning, remember that phrase? You'll be so tired of winning, right? Anyway, you'll win so much, you'll be tired of winning. It's Jonathan Karl in his book, and he reveals how officials were stunned when a presidential directive pulling troops out of Afghanistan and Somalia landed on their desk. Of course, they'd later learn that it wasn't exactly Trump's idea. By Jonathan Karl. Went to print on November 10th, and then we had a weekend, and now he's out flacking it again, as he should. You got to sell books, and this is a hell of a story. To understand what a second Trump administration would look like, that's the context in which he's introducing this. He knows we've all been reading these stories about what a second Trump administration would look like. Consider Johnny McEntee. And you should, because remember, this guy has an incredible story, by which I mean it's not credible at all. I can't believe this happened anywhere, much less in America. And he gives you enough detail in his recounting of it that if you don't remember, you'll be reminded. So who was Johnny McEntee? He is, of course, as he's described here, the cheerful and upbeat young aide who became Trump's essential man in the waning days of his presidency. In McEntee, Trump had the ultimate loyalist. He never hesitated to carry out the president's orders, and he made it his mission to find and remove anyone in the executive branch who was not as devoted to the president as he was. If Trump makes it back to the White House, however he does it, it would likely be McEntee or someone like him doing the hiring and enforcing loyalty. And if I'm not mistaken, as a side note, I think the New York Times reporting about the revenge tour plans that included that Trump would come back to the White House with Stephen Miller in tow, but also Russell Vought, who was all over those stories. And I do think McEntee is mentioned as one of the people. Like he names like 3 or 4 people that he would be bringing back into the quote unquote administration with him. And McEntee is one of them. So, there's a real possibility here. So now Jonathan continues, I reported extensively on McEntee's role in my last book, which he gives the title of, Betrayal, the final act of the Trump show. Except it wasn't the final act, was it? But in the years since Betrayal was published, and I found out that I was wrong about the second part of my title, I came to learn McEntee's role was even greater than I had realized. There's the confession and the hedge, especially during the weeks after Trump lost the 2020 election and before he left office. At just 30 years old, McEntee had become such a powerful figure in the West Wing by late 2020 that one senior staffer described him to me as effectively the deputy president. So maybe a name you need to get used to. Having finally realized many of his own advisors were thwarting his wishes, often because they considered them dangerous or illegal, Trump enlisted McEntee to do the things his more senior aides would not. Johnny McEntee was just 25 years old when he volunteered to work at the Trump campaign in 2015. He didn't have much experience. He was a production assistant at the news desk at Fox News at the time, but he was eager, confident, and willing to work hard. Most importantly, he loved Donald Trump. And by the way, he says he's willing to work hard, but there's really no proof that he actually worked hard. He ran around and did a lot of things for Trump, but working wasn't one of them. You'll see. A former quarterback at the, at the University of Connecticut, by the way, just soundly defeated by James Madison University this weekend. I thought I might point out now that Greg's not here to defend him. He achieved short-lived internet fame in 2011 when a video of him throwing trick passes went viral. Why not make him deputy president, right? Trump liked having him around and soon made him his personal assistant, taking him along wherever he traveled. As the campaign ramped up, he became Trump's body guy, carrying the candidates' bags and relaying messages. And he probably qualified for that job, right? Okay. McEntee, I have never really loved this word because some people say reprised, but is it reprised or reprised? You can tell me. McEntee reprised, I guess, the role in the White House after the 2016 election, but was fired. Does everyone remember this? Fired in early 2018 by then Chief of Staff John Kelly when a background check turned up a serious gambling habit that was considered to pose a national security risk, just next to the president all the time, right? He didn't leave for long, though. After Kelly himself was fired, McEntee returned to the White House in February of 2020. And you can see why other staffers would consider him to be so powerful and would consider him to be even a deputy president, right? Somebody who gets actually literally fired from the White House by the chief of staff. And then, probably in his telling, then is able to manipulate things such that the chief of staff gets fired. And he comes back and says, you fired me, but I have the last laugh. I'm back in and you're out. You probably got to consider that guy fairly powerful. But again, please keep this in mind. Serious gambling habit considered to pose a national security risk, right? So what they're worried about is there's a danger that somebody could get to him and bribe him, compromise him, whatever. I'll pay off your gambling debt if you XYZ. So, what sort of thing would you ask of somebody who was that close to the president of the United States, and the president of the United States was a goofball idiot who would not know his ass from his elbow and would basically pretty much sign whatever the F you put in front of him? Do you think there's any risk there? I don't know. But that's the risk they're worried about. Now, back to Jonathan here. His second stint in the administration proved to be more consequential. What do you know? He came back and did more important national security related type things. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. McEntee resumed his role as Trump's body guy with a seat just outside the Oval Office, but he was also named director of the Presidential Personnel Office, which is responsible for the vetting, hiring, and firing of the 4,000 political appointees who serve in the executive branch. Now, of course, with the idea of Schedule F, it would put him in charge of the entire federal bureaucracy. No big deal, right? So, so he's in charge of all of the hiring in the executive branch for political appointees. McEntee may never have hired or fired anybody before in his life, but he was fiercely loyal, and for Trump, that made him the perfect choice for the job. McEntee's efforts to root out Trump infidels in the administration were often comically petty, but they came with the force of a presidential mandate. Just weeks before the 2020 presidential election, for example, somebody on McEntee's staff discovered that a young woman in the Office of Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson had liked an Instagram post. That's right. Liked an Instagram post by pop star Taylor Swift. That's also bad, I guess. It is now. Now it's automatically bad, but it wasn't clear why that was bad back then, except that the post included a photo of Swift holding a tray of cookies decorated with the Biden-Harris campaign logo. Yes. So you can see how dangerous that would be. Well, that transgression was brought all the way to the White House Chief of Staff. Then it was, at that point, Mark Meadows, who placed a call to Carson's top aide. The message: we can't have our people liking the social media posts of a high-profile Biden supporter like Taylor Swift. Well, when it wasn't monitoring Trump administration staffers' social media activity, McEntee's office conducted interviews with employees throughout the federal government to gauge loyalty to the president. Months after Trump left office, Andrew Closter, a member of McEntee's staff who had helped conduct these loyalty interviews, described them as a way of identifying people who claimed to support Trump but weren't really on the team. I think the first thing you need to hire for is loyalty, Closter explained on a podcast. The funny thing is, he says, you can learn policy. You can't learn loyalty, which I'm sure he thought was a very super clever line. And I think the follow-up question to him then would have been, so where did you learn to be such a loyal person? Oh, well, my parents gave me a strong upbringing and then I really instilled the value of loyalty. So you did learn to be loyal. You can teach loyalty. What did I earlier say? That you could not? No. Right. And the only proper answer then is, how did you become such a loyal person? I don't know. God just made me that way. I woke up as a baby loyal. It's just what happened. Okay. I mean, I'd love to see if they can follow up with that position. And maybe you wait a few minutes and then ask them the question just to be sure they'll confuse themselves. Anyway, McEntee's presidential personnel office had about 30 employees, many of them in their 20s, and at least a couple without college degrees. Okay. In both attitude and mission, they were a Trumpian version of the Red Guard youth of Mao's Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s, who rooted out intellectuals and, quote, class enemies in the upper ranks of Chinese society. There also seemed to be another requirement, and this is sort of interesting, and you'll recognize it if you're a longtime listener or follower on social media. One senior White House official told me McEntee hired, quote, the most beautiful 20-year-old girls you could find, and guys who would be absolutely no threat to Johnny in going after those girls. Some inside the White House called McEntee's staff the Rockettes and the Dungeons and Dragons group. Hey, that's not fair. Anyway, but yes, as I often told you, Trump world is a sex cult, and for Johnny McEntee, it was no different. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, we jumped out to the 1 minute break by reminding you that Trump world is a sex cult. And Johnny McEntee, deputy president by some people's account, was spending his time inside the White House, setting himself up for the dating game, filling his office with the, as they say, this is very Trumpian and sounding at the beginning of the most beautiful 20-year-old girls you could find, or the you could find is a giveaway that it's somebody else speaking. It usually he'd say the most beautiful 20-year-old girls you've ever seen. You've never seen anything like it. But then to the extent that he had to hire men at all, he would hire people who, this is so low and weird and disgusting to be like, well, at the very least, if I have to hire guys, I'm going to hire guys who will be no threat to my going after the girls that I hired, essentially, the very definition of sexual harassment, hiring them, one, for their looks, and two, with the intent of preying upon them by using your leverage over them as your boss. That seems kind of like the definition. But that's how Johnny McEntee approached his position, between that and carrying gigantic gambling debts and, compromising national security as a result. And so, yes, they nicknamed his staff the Rockettes and the Dungeons and Dragons group. And, in fact, one of McEntee's assistants had performed with the Radio City Rockettes. So that's where they came up with that one. That was a big stretch. They figured out a funny nickname for that. Anyway, McEntee's team reached the apex of its power after Trump lost the election in 2020, ironically enough, I would add. Within days, they orchestrated sweeping changes to the civilian leadership at the Pentagon that resulted in Defense Secretary Mark Esper and other top officials being fired. In preparing for Esper's ouster, McEntee and his team created a memo listing the Pentagon chiefs, Esper's, sins against Trump, arguing he, quote, consistently breaks from POTUS's direction and has failed to see through his policies. That's an interesting way of phrasing it too, meaning failed to carry them to completion, seeing them through, as opposed to failing to see through his policies. I think he did, in fact, see through his policies. I see right through your policies, you idiot. I'm not going to implement them. They're too goddamn dangerous. But in the other sense, anyway. Then there's a list of Esper's supposed transgressions, provided in bullet form afterwards. But again, I want to pause to remind you that, one, we did hear about Johnny McEntee and his sex game thing at the time. We did hear that reported. And then two, or right after his ouster, I guess, I want to point out that remember that Esper is being fired and the entire civilian leadership at the Pentagon is being replaced post-election, but with an eye toward the coming of January 6th, and then the mysterious failure of the military to actually show up and do that thing that we all have been raised since infancy to believe, that if a giant mob were to show up at the Capitol one day and try to push their way in the middle and stop the proceedings in Congress and possibly assassinate the membership, the army would come and tell everybody to F off or shoot them. And then as it turned out, things are complicated and it just doesn't really work that way. And golly gee. And also maybe we'll prosecute some of these people, but maybe not all of them. I don't know. Maybe they'll get 6 months in jail. Maybe they'll do time served. Well, we've had mixed results. There have been some great sentences handed down to some people who really deserved it. So there is that. Now, back to Jonathan Carlin is reporting. Among Esper's supposed transgressions, according to McEntee, this is the bulleted list. Vowing to be apolitical, which is ordinarily a qualification for office, but in this case was a major transgression against Trump. I'm going to be very political, and you are too. And if you're not, then I'm going to kick you out. Okay. Bullet point number 2, opposing the president's direction to utilize American forces to put down riots. So again, Marcy, quite correct, right? Oh, he's going to call out the military on day one of his second administration. What an escalation. No, he actually already did that in the first administration. And I don't know why you're forgetting that, because that should have been, a day you marked on your calendar. Third bullet point, barring the Confederate flag on military bases. Why not throw a little Nazi flag in there, the fascist Italian flag, the flag of Imperial Japan? Everybody we've defeated in wars should be flying their flags on American military bases. What else? Focusing the department on Russia. Can't have that as the Defense Department. Okay. Actively pushing for diversity and inclusion. Actively trying to, react to the fact that the military actually includes a diverse group of people and including them in the leadership so that you can make proper use of all the gifts that they bring to your military. And then contradicting the reasoning for and disagreeing with the president's decision to withdraw troops from Germany. Okay, I didn't even really know that was in the offing. Well, in the last couple days, I guess it was. Trump fired Esper and replaced him with McEntee's preferred successor, National Counterterrorism Center Director and Army Special Forces veteran Christopher Miller, whose name became familiar post-January 6th as the guy who was running around saying, I'm not sure whether I can really help you with anybody from the military or whatever. But he occupied some weird gray area on that, as I recall. And there were some things that he did that gave some indication that he might have been thwarting Trump's idea of how things should go, but also, wasn't exactly Johnny on the spot with the help when it was necessary. And I think, wasn't it that he issued a memo ahead of time saying, we're not going to be sending any troops, no matter what happens. But like prior to January 6th, even. I can't remember his role all that well. We need Marcy to remind me exactly what happened. Anyway, to serve as Miller's senior advisor, McEntee recruited an a retired Army colonel named Douglas McGregor, no relation to Rosalind, I hope, whose regular appearances on Fox News had caught the White House's attention. That's how you get jobs as a senior military advisor. Chief among his qualifications was his penchant for praising Trump's approach to U.S. military involvement and calling for martial law along the U.S.-Mexico border. So you'll likely see him in after the next coup, if it's successful. Or you'll see him hang after the unsuccessful second coup. Or you'll see him on Fox television talking about how the second coup was also correct, and we should all realize that. I guess, yeah, maybe bet on number 3 there. Anyway, before leaving for the Pentagon, McGregor sat down in McEntee's office to go over the acting defense secretaries, that's right, defense secretaries' sweeping agenda for the final 73 days of the lame duck period before Joe Biden would be sworn into office. As first reported by Axios, on a piece of paper, McEntee jotted down 4 quick bullet points that, if carried out, would represent a dramatic shift in the global order. But here they are. 1, get us out of... They're not numbered. They're bullet points. Get us out of Afghanistan. Next, get us out of Iraq and Syria. Next, complete the withdrawal from Germany, which, okay. And 4, get us out of Africa. Not the movie, but get us out. Yes, lowercase o, out of Africa. So withdraw American troops from the entire continent of Africa, everybody out of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Germany, because, blah, blah, blah. And I'm also, don't let anybody focus on Russia. Like, okay, who would really like this a lot? Is there anybody in the world who could simultaneously erase McEntee's gambling debts and leverage him for the specific purpose of withdrawing American troops and all projection of force pretty much everywhere around the world with a single sweeping gesture? Is there anybody who would be interested in something like that? Anybody who could pay the tab on something like that? I don't know. It's hard for me to figure out who it is because, of course, we're not allowed to talk about Russia because that's what is one of the cardinal sins. You get fired from the Pentagon. Nobody at the Pentagon is allowed to think about Russia. Come on. The January 6th committee's investigation unearthed the extraordinary story of what happened next, but the information didn't make it into any of the committee's hearings or its final report. What follows is based on the sworn testimony of the key players, including McEntee and McGregor, as well as National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien and General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. 3 days after McGregor arrived at the Pentagon, he called McEntee and told him he couldn't accomplish any of the items on their handwritten to-do list without a signed order from the president. Here comes Trump and paperwork, man. Hey, they're not going to do anything we want or the president wants without a directive, McGregor told him. And that's an interesting little addition there, almost a Freudian slip. We're not going to do anything we want or the president wants without a directive. I don't know if that's how he says it, but that's how you should take it. And you'll see why. They're not going to do anything we want or the president wants without a directive, McGregor told him, emphasizing the need for an official White House order signed by Trump. I can't just come here with the list written on the back of Easter seals paper and say, the president says, reverse our military posture of the last 50 years. All right, I'll be right back. Let me go do that. I'm typing that in now. Reverse military deployment of all kinds and everywhere in the world. Okay, the Pentagon's stonewalling made sense, of course. You don't make major changes to America's global defense posture based on a glorified Post-it note from the president's body guy. The order, McGregor added, should focus on the top priority from McEntee's list, Afghanistan, and it had to include a specific date for the complete withdrawal of all uniformed military personnel from the country. He suggested January 31st, 2021. Of course, 11 days into the Biden administration, but, end of the month. That was the sort of thing, like the military normally wouldn't be, all about, well, we got to do it for one president and not the other. There would be continuity. So maybe he thought that was a reasonable amount of time. Maybe he thought it was smart if it spanned two administrations. Maybe he thought it's a dumb idea, but I can't stop this idiot president, but maybe the next president will stop. I don't know. But that's what he suggested, January 31st. Now, McEntee and an assistant quickly typed up the directive, but they moved the Afghanistan withdrawal timeline up to January 15th, just 5 days before Trump was set to leave office, and added a second mandate while they were at it, right? A complete withdrawal of U.S. troops from Somalia by December 31st, 2020, even sooner. There goes one of the troops from Somalia. He just fell on the floor. Okay, well, get up, soldier. Anyway, McEntee, of course, didn't know the first thing about drafting a presidential directive, let alone one instructing the movement of thousands of servicemen and women. Right? Trump and paperwork, man. He had 2 jobs at the White House. You had 1 job. And that job was to pretend you had 2 jobs. Apparently, he had 2 jobs in the White House, only one of which he was actually qualified for, and neither one had anything to do with national security or the military. An order even 10% as consequential as the one McEntee was drafting would typically go through the National Security Council with input from the civilian leadership at the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the military commanders in the region. Instead, the guy who usually carried Trump's bags was hammering it out on his computer, consulting with nobody but the retired colonel that the president had just hired because he had seen him on cable TV. All right, well, that lays out the situation pretty clearly. The absurdity of the situation was captured in McEntee's interview with the January 6th committee. Their question, is it typical for the Presidential Personnel Office to draft orders concerning troop withdrawal? McEntee, actually perfectly honest, probably not typical, no. Because they were so out of their depth, I mean, you can imagine if you were scripting it as a rom-com, let's say, during which he's also trying to date all of the personnel in the office, it would go this way. How do we write I don't know how to write a presidential directive, and it would go something like this, I guess. Because they were out of their depth, McEntee and his assistant ended up reaching out to McGregor again. They didn't know how to arrange the document they were working on, which is probably what happened with all of the Electoral College people too. How do we do this? And the answer is, well, all right. I was called on the phone by one of McEntee's staffers who was having trouble formatting the order and getting the language straight, McGregor recalled. The retired colonel told the 30-year-old staffer to open a cabinet, find an old presidential decision memorandum, and copy it. I mean, that's what you find an old Electoral College certificate and copy it. Easy enough. The duo wrote up the order, had the president sign it, allegedly, and sent it over to Kash Patel. Remember him? The new, where's my button? Acting! Yes, the new acting defense secretary's chief of staff. Well, chaos ensued, it says. Upon receiving the order from his chief of staff, Christopher Miller called the Joint Chiefs Chairman, Mark Milley, to his office to discuss the next steps. After reading the order, Milley told the January 6th committee he looked at Patel, who had just started working at the Pentagon 3 days earlier. Who gave the president military advice for this? Milley asked him. Did you do this? No, Patel answered. I had nothing to do with it. Oh, look, he's ducking responsibility. And he may have had to, he may not have anything to do with typing up the memorandum. I'm pretty sure he knew it was coming and was expecting it, but I had nothing to do with it. Well, doesn't matter. That's not the end of the inquiry. Milley turned to the acting defense secretary. Hey, acting defense secretary, did you give the president military advice on this? No, not me, Miller answered. Okay, well, we've got to go over and see the president, Milley said, noting his job required him to provide military advice to the commander-in-chief. I've got duties to do here. Constitutional duties. I don't whether it's actually, people would argue, show me in the Constitution, but okay. He considers it a constitutional duty. I've got to make sure he's properly advised. And with that, Miller and Milley went to the White House to see Robert O'Brien, Trump's national security advisor. Robert, where's this coming from? Milley asked O'Brien. Is this true? I mean, you see the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is now at the White House with a purported presidential directive for all this crazy ass stuff. Came close on that one. And has to ask the question, is this real? Is this true? Trump and paperwork, man. This is a presidential directive reordering the position of armed forces, U.S. armed forces around the world, the entire global military order for the United States of the past 50 years turned on its head in 4 bullet points. Is it real? Is this true? I've never seen it before, O'Brien told him. That's weird, right? At that point, you're like, that's interesting. Kash, did you advise the president? No. Acting Secretary of Defense, did you advise the president on this? No. National Security Advisor, did you advise the president on this? No. Huh. Well, they were joined in the meeting by retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, the National Security Advisor to Vice President Pence, who was later threatened with hanging, right? Something is really wrong here, Kellogg said, reading through the order. This doesn't look right. I mean, it doesn't look like this is the dumbest memo I've ever read in my life. It doesn't have any Pentagon, any of the telltale jargon that would suggest that a military person wrote this or that it was ordered in a normal fashion. These deadlines are ridiculous. There's no mention of where the troops should go. All the things that would be the hallmark of a real order are missing. And it's a 1-pager, and it never looks like this. And they did it in Comic Sans, and what's happening here? There's a GIF of Wonder Woman in this. What is happening? What's going on? Anyway, this doesn't look right. That's about all he can come up with. Now, this is where the line from the title comes from. Milley. General Milley says, "You're telling me that this thing is forged?" Milley responded in disbelief. That's a forged piece of paper directing a military operation by the President of the United States. That's forged, Keith? Now, he's not accusing Keith of forging it. He's just asking him, I guess, isn't that what you're telling me? That none of you have ever seen this. Nobody gave this advice to the president. Nobody can tell me that the president himself actually signed this thing. Nobody can explain why there's no military jargon that would make sense to anybody anywhere in this thing that would give us any sense of how to actually do this stuff. Are you telling me that somebody just wrote it up and scribbled on it? And we almost reordered the entire military posture of the United States based on this garbage? But for us saying, we should check this out, we almost did that? Now, despite McEntee's best efforts, the article continues, which included not only the advice from McGregor, but several minutes of searching on the internet. That's a shiv. I like it. The only part of the document that looked anything like an official presidential order was Trump's signature at the bottom. But even that, Kellogg thought, could have been the work of an auto pen used to mimic the president's autograph on thousands of unofficial letters sent out by the White House. Let me see if I can get to the bottom of this, O'Brien told the group before heading to White House counsel Pat Cipollone. Remember him? Pat Cipollone's office on the 2nd floor of the West Wing. Let me see if I can get to the bottom of this. We have an order purporting to implement Vladimir Putin's greatest, wildest fantasy, let's say. The total withdrawal of American troops from forward positions where they project American power around the world and protect our allies. Does anybody know where this came from? No. Remember, in the background of all this, it came from the 30-year-old guy with the gambling problem who, I'd be interested, by the way, who did he owe money to? Was any Russian oligarchs running those gambling operations? Because remember, Mos Eisley on Earth, Trump Tower, was chock full of people who had been busted previously running gambling rings for the Russian oligarchs, like 2 floors below Trump's apartment, right? Like, that's not made up. That's a real thing. Who held McEntee's tickets here on whatever his gambling debts were? I'm just curious whether there was any connection. I would have followed that up. Maybe they did at the January 6th committee and they found nothing and that's why they didn't make a big deal out of it. I just have questions. But let's get to the bottom of this, O'Brien said. Goes to Patsy Baloney. Patsy Baloney, whose office was responsible for reviewing all presidential orders, so you'd think he might have seen this thing, right? Well, he said he hadn't seen the document and knew nothing about it. When Derek Lyons, the White House staff secretary responsible for filing and transmitting official presidential orders, there's actually a guy for that. It's not just, that's one of the fatal flaws of this. Like, McEntee doesn't handle presidential orders. Derek Lyons does that. And he says, I haven't seen the directive either. And at that point, the group knew they needed to see the president himself, as though he knew what the hell was going on. They found him where he spent most of his time after the November election, the golden toilet. No, his private dining room next to the Oval Office where he was throwing ketchup on the wall, where the television on the wall, as well as the ketchup, was almost always on, as was that ketchup. Once the president confirmed that he had indeed signed the document, I was waiting for him to say, I've never seen this before in my life, but he says he signed it. Now, interestingly, for most Trumpsters, that would be it, right? For those who believe in the robust unitary executive theory, for instance, which they keep insisting is a real thing, they would say, that's it. He signed the order. He's the commander-in-chief. That is what he says goes. He has ordered these things. He acknowledges signing it. That's a valid order. But the deep state, as they put it, says what? Well, it says this. They find him in the dining room. The president confirms he had indeed signed the document. At least it wasn't an auto pen. Or at least he thinks he signed the document. We don't really know, right? O'Brien and Cipollone explained to him that such an order should go through some sort of process, and that an abrupt movement of so many U.S. troops would be dangerous and unwise without proper planning. And that's putting a pretty face on it. At the very least, they told him, such an order should be reviewed by White House lawyers. Oh yeah, well, all your White House lawyers are fired. What do you think of that? I said, this would be very bad, O'Brien recalled telling Trump. Our position is that because it didn't go through any proper process, the lawyers hadn't cleared it, the staff secretary hadn't cleared it, the National Security Council hadn't cleared it, that it's our position that the order is null and void. I could see where he'd be angered by that. Deep state, yeah. I mean, and to be honest, in the face of the robust claims of presidential power, the commander-in-chief clause, the unitary executive theory, if any of that is real, then their claims that it's not really an order to reposition America's forward troops deployments worldwide and reverse the worldwide order of affairs for the last 60 plus, I'm upping the number of years, but since World War II, essentially. But, okay, well, all of that is null and void because it didn't go through the process. I mean, you know, there's an argument to be made by the cuckoo birds, and they are making it, that no, that's valid. He signed it. He's an idiot. He may not have read it. He might only be purporting to have signed it, but you got to at least assume that he signed it, and then I guess you can litigate whether or not it was the auto pen later on, and then what that might mean if it was the auto pen. Anyway, well, golly, that would be bad. But they say our position is that the order is null and void. Now, according to O'Brien, the president didn't object. This is the big wind up for this story, and just in time too, since the next break is coming. He didn't object. Trump's bold plan for ending the war in Afghanistan before the end of his term was dashed as quickly and apathetically as it was slapped together. It's rescinded. It's over, O'Brien said when he returned to his office where the acting defense secretary and Joint Chiefs chairman had been waiting for about 15 minutes. They're all just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, trying to find out have we surrendered to Russia? Have we entered political union with Russia to own the globalists or not? Not sure. Wait here. I'll go find out. Millie breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, fine, he said. So it doesn't exist. Trump's backers will likely read this story and see yet another example of the, quote, deep state thwarting the president on an issue important to him and the people who elected him. But in reality, the episode demonstrated once again that the president of the United States couldn't get the people he appointed to carry out his policies because he couldn't be bothered to learn how to implement them. As soon as he realized an Afghanistan withdrawal would require more work than having McEntee scribble up a note, he dropped it entirely. And that's the end of the story, except that it shouldn't be. We have to exit at an odd point in the music, of course, because we were about 5 seconds late in getting it started. We'll be right back after this.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I forgot that the delay in the music would also mean we have to come back earlier. But, okay, so we missed a few seconds here, and these are valuable seconds. There's so much to tell you about, and golly, by golly, we'll have to do our best to try to tell you, or make some tough choices about the various things to tell you about. Okay, one, I feel like I got to bring this one up, and this is the return of Jessica Valenti to today's call-outs. I think we checked in with her on Friday. Naturally, it is once again about the same topic that we cited her on Friday, the Ohio vote on abortion. I say naturally, like, it's not just that Jessica Valenti would be writing about that, and not by any means true that that's all she writes about. I'm just saying that this will be naturally on her mind, and it's a subject we're interested in, and naturally Jessica Valenti will be a good source for viewpoints that confirm our priors, really, when it comes to this. Speaking of the priors, which prior is it that we're confirming here? Her piece from her Substack, now titled Destroying Democracy to Ban Abortion. Now, before you get too carried away, if anyone was going to, I don't think anyone was going to blame me for this. Like, well, why you say Jessica Valenti only writes about abortion, or even hint that that's the only reason you would go to her for coverage? I will, that's not the only reason I would go to her for coverage, but it has been. I'm not precluding going to her for something else, but I will point out that the title of her Substack is Abortion, Every Day. So that's the focus of her Substack. So to the extent we cite her Substack, it's probably going to be about abortion. And it's a hot topic just about now, and maybe for the next year, and maybe forever going forward. But destroying democracy to ban abortion, what are we talking about? It's what are the Ohio Republicans up to now that they have lost? We told you immediately in the wake of Tuesday's election that they were plotting something, and that they might I wondered, well, could they drag their feet administratively and simply not enroll? Is that the word we use for enroll or engross? I can't remember whether it's enrolling or engrossing. It's for bills, you enroll them. I guess you engross it. Engrossing it on the Constitution of Ohio. And like, what if they just don't put it there and say, there was this vote and it said that we wanted to amend the Constitution, but I'm just not taking out my pen. And until I write it there, it's not part of the Constitution. What do you do? And then we found that, we speculated on different ways that they could drag their feet, which I guess they could. But we found that, I don't know how they style it, but paragraph D, I guess, of, I can't remember all it's like section 22, I think is what they were adding to the Constitution with the, issue 1 ballot question. And that paragraph D said that this section they were adding would be self-executing, which we understood to mean, in the legislative sense, that nothing in particular actually had to be done. There weren't any ministerial tasks that had to be done in order for this section, once approved, to become effective. So even if they refused to write it down or type it into the website or whatever the hell you would do, after 30 days, apparently, although I didn't read any 30-day language in the text, it may be that that's the standard window for effectiveness of legislative questions that are on the ballot. That may be looming in the background, but that whenever the effective date rolled around, that it would be self-executing, that there was essentially nothing you could do to prevent it from becoming part of the Constitution. But I guess I didn't think deeply enough about it, because I suppose there are other barriers to it, like the Ohio Supreme Court could say, well, the background law says that after 30 days this becomes effective, and it's been 30 days. We acknowledge that. And paragraph D says it's self-executing, so it says it's part of the Constitution. But here's where we come in. We say, all right, a lawsuit is filed, something, block the implementation or change the interpretation or something like that. And you say, well, it's 30 days. This is part of the Constitution. We just think it means the opposite of what the plain words say. And we have a majority, and that's that. And just like any Supreme Court decision, you can just do that. The Constitution says X. We think it means Y. We have so ruled. What are you going to do about it? There's no appeal from us. Now, I guess you could appeal that one to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court of the United States could say the same thing. It seems like a lot of hurdles to overcome, but could it happen? It could, yes. But they're planning if you thought that if you thought Ohio's ballot measure win meant that Republicans would stop attacking democracy, boy, were you wrong. In response to voters' overwhelming support of issue 1, which will enshrine abortion rights in the state's constitution, Republicans have made clear that they plan to overturn the will of the people. First, 27 Republican House members signed onto a letter saying, quote, "We will do everything in our power to prevent our laws from being removed." They're their laws. You can't do it. You have no stake in this. "We were elected to protect the most vulnerable in our state." You know what that's supposed to mean. And the Columbus Dispatch reported this week that House Speaker Jason Stevens said, quote, "The legislature has multiple paths that we will explore to continue to protect innocent life." We expected this somewhat. Ohio Republicans spent months undermining the Democratic norms to prevent issue 1 from passing, making very clear in the process that they don't give a hoot, we'll say, although the word begins with an S, what voters want. So it makes sense now that the amendment has passed that they do everything in their power to keep it from repealing their abortion ban. But in this press release, Republican legislators make clear they're not just going to do everything within their power, but also anything outside of it as well. The short version, Republicans say they'll prevent the courts from allowing issue 1 to take effect. This is a thing. To prevent mischief by pro-abortion courts with issue 1, Ohio legislators will consider removing jurisdiction from the judiciary over this ambiguous ballot initiative. The Ohio legislature alone will consider what, if any, modifications to make to existing laws based on public hearings and input from legal experts on both sides. So essentially, a jurisdiction stripping exercise, which is a thing that you can do. At least the federal Constitution contemplates something like that, probably the Ohio Constitution too. I'm not certain. But you can simply say, well, as a matter of law, the courts in Ohio are not permitted to adjudicate cases arising from this legislation or this Section 22 or the ballot measure that enabled it. You just can't and will say what we think it means. And if anybody sues and says that's a ridiculous interpretation, it's backwards and upside down, it's the complete opposite of the language that was approved by the voters, well, you can say, you can sue us. It's just that no court in Ohio can hear the case. It's now illegal for the courts in Ohio to adjudicate such a question. Well, that's a method that we hadn't thought of and mentioned last week when we first brought this up. They are threatening to strip power from the courts in order to keep abortion banned. As the Ohio Capitol Journal points out, the Abortion Rights Amendment doesn't take effect until December 7th of this year. I guess that date will continue to live in infamy. And each abortion restriction needs to be individually taken to court and repealed. So, what Republicans are suggesting is that they don't want those restrictions decided by judges, but by them. In the release, Ohio legislators also claim that foreign billionaires and foreign election interference allowed issue 1 to pass. Yes, of course. This gets at something I wrote about yesterday. They have to paint their opposition as a big bad enemy because otherwise they'd need to admit that their actual political opposition are just individual women who voted against them. All of this is wildly undemocratic, of course, even by their standards. And she says, parenthetically, I've attached the press release here as well in case they decide to take it down. And it is available for download. Over at Slate, law professor Mary Ziegler writes that there are other ways that the amendment could be stymied by Republicans through the courts themselves. The people ultimately interpreting the new constitutional amendment are the judges of the Ohio Supreme Court, she writes, and Republicans have a 4-3 majority, all of which means we won, but the fight isn't close to over. So it goes on from there to discuss a few other topics like attacks on other states, which are all very interesting. But I wanted to bring you that piece, at any rate, of Jessica's write-up because it's quite true. Both the courts themselves can decide to screw this whole thing up if they want to, or the legislature could make an attempt anyway at stripping their jurisdiction entirely, although they'd probably be better off just rolling the dice and going with, well, I don't know, they might lose. I guess it's possible that somebody might say, well, as much as I disagree with the policy, that is part of the Constitution, and I actually will uphold it. That's what I'm supposed to be doing here. But, you know, it's a question mark whether you can depend on them for that. Okay, let's see. Other things that I wanted to share with you that are worth our time, what's left in this segment. There are plenty of things. Let's see. How much of it can I fit? And how much of it is worth the diversion? Let's see. Also, let me just double check here. I did get a piece here that the hint of another story that I'd missed, and Darwin has sent it. And Darwin has also sent me a recorded segment as well that is relevant, but not a direct read. It's an interesting approach. Not a direct read of stories of the day. But anyway, let's see. First, Darwin lets us know that NBC News is reporting that the QAnon shaman, remember him? He learned his lesson, etc. The guy who stormed the Capitol on January 6th in costume and face paint and carrying a spear, etc. He's filed paperwork to run for Congress. Because why not? Because he totally believes in the institution. Jacob Chansley, who served about 27 months in prison for his role on the Capitol attack, filed to run for the seat left vacant by Representative Debbie Lesko of Arizona, Republican seat there. That's interesting. He's already served 27 months in prison. I mean, that's 2+ years. How did we Did he go to jail right away? I guess so. Wow. It seems like it hasn't been long enough to fit a 27-month sentence in there already. But anyway, I guess he did. Jacob Chansley filed paperwork to run for Congress as a libertarian candidate. That's great for their party. In the battleground state's 8th congressional district. Debbie Lesko announced last month that she won't seek re-election to the district. Chansley stood out among the Capitol rioters by appearing shirtless with face paint, wearing a furry headdress with horns, and carrying a U.S. flag affixed to a spear and a bullhorn. It was a flag was attached to the spear, but he also had a bullhorn. The bullhorn wasn't attached to the flag. Sorry. Chansley had pleaded guilty to a single count of felony obstruction to an official proceeding. A federal judge in 2021 sentenced Chansley to 41 months in prison. In a sentencing memo, prosecutors described him as the public face of the Capitol riot. Chansley was among the initial group of rioters to enter the building and used a bullhorn to rile up the crowd and demand that lawmakers be brought out, the sentencing memo said. Chansley shouted obscenities in the Senate gallery. Can't blame him for that. And climbed the chamber's dais. That's bad. The memo said he photographed himself there and refused officers' orders to leave and left a note that read, "It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming." And I guess it's a matter of 27 months because justice is finished with him now. Prosecutors noted that Chansley, who pushed the far-right QAnon conspiracy theory, used social media to spread false information and hateful rhetoric that provoked the Capitol attack. Chansley served about 27 months in prison before he was transferred to a halfway house in Phoenix in March, according to the Associated Press. During a hearing, Chansley's original lawyer, Albert Watkins, said he no longer wanted to be known as the QAnon shaman. Oh, okay. At his sentencing hearing, Chansley expressed remorse for his actions, which he called indefensible. "I was wrong for entering the Capitol," he told the judge. "I have no excuse whatsoever." So now, of course, he's going to run for an excuse. Give me an excuse to enter the Capitol as a member of Congress. And in a world where murdery Trader Green gets elected to Congress, I guess anything can happen. But running as the Libertarian candidate, pretty long shot. So I guess we don't have to worry about that too much. It should just worry us in general that it's actually happening. I don't know. All right. Got lots of other things to share with you today, but let me take a different bent and just take a short break here and roll for you a real different approach to the news of the day that Darwin has decided to take here. He'll explain it to you in the next 4.5 minutes or so. I think you'll recognize it as relevant to everything we're still discussing today, though it's not a news story. You want to take it away, Darwin? Darwin's not really here. We're going to pretend there's a dialogue between me and him. Hey, Darwin, come on in here and just make yourself comfortable at this microphone. And okay.
Hi there, David.
Hi.
Hi there, KITM family. This is Darwin Darko coming to you as the, senior storytelling correspondent this time around. I wrote a short story. I used familiar elements, so some of this may sound familiar, but I stitched it all together myself, so I think it's an original piece. Somebody has to check me on the plagiarism there. Anyways, here goes nothing. The traveler began his story, painting a picture of a small village nestled between rolling hills and lush meadows. In this village, there lived a young man named David. David was known for his kindness, humility, and a heart full of courage. He spent his days tending to the fields, helping his neighbors, and dreaming of a world where strength was measured not by physical might, but by the goodness one carried in their soul. The village was, however, shadowed by a neighboring town ruled by a tyrant named Goliath. Goliath was a giant of a man, both in stature and cruelty. He demanded tribute from the surrounding villages, terrorizing them with his oppressive rule and intimidating presence. The people lived in constant fear, their spirits crushed under the weight of Goliath's dictatorship. David, unable to bear witness to the suffering of his people, decided it was time for a change. He knew he couldn't defeat Goliath in physical combat, but he believed in a different kind of strength, the strength of resilience, wit, allies, and the power of a united community. David took on the role of the strategist, utilizing his knowledge of the terrain and the weaknesses in Goliath's rule. The villagers, inspired by David's courage, began to stand up against the oppressor in small, subtle ways. They found strength in their unity, and the once trembling village started to resonate with a quiet but unwavering defiance. David exploited the natural grievances that arose in any society, magnifying them and blaming Goliath for every misfortune that befell the village. As discontent spread, David gathered a following. The villagers rallied together, and as a united front, banished Goliath from the land. He was lauded as a hero and elevated as a new leader. The village that was once overshadowed by the tyrant Goliath became a beacon of hope for neighboring communities. The story of David and the transformation from a vulnerable village to a symbol of resilience echoed through the hills, inspiring others to stand up against injustice and tyranny. As the years passed, however, whispers of power began to infiltrate David's thoughts. The advisors around him, sensing the shift, subtly fueled his desire for more control and influence. They painted a picture, not of a village, but a kingdom, one that could be even more magnificent if he wielded power with a firmer hand, reinforcing the notion that absolute power was necessary for the village's ultimate greatness. Being predisposed to be resistant to these temptations, David nonetheless found himself drawn to the idea of expanding his authority. The allure of absolute power clouded his judgment, and he began to make decisions that prioritized his own ambitions over the well-being of his people, of his fledgling kingdom. As his power grew unchecked, David became increasingly isolated. His advisors, no longer loyal subjects, were now power-hungry opportunists vying for their own interests. The people, initially bewildered by the sudden transformation, began to voice discontent. Protests erupted, but David, now intoxicated by the taste of power, responded with a heavy hand. The once thriving community began to crumble under the weight of oppression. The village that had once stood as a beacon of justice and prosperity now bore the scars of a leader corrupted by the very power he once sought to uproot. The pursuit of unchecked power had cost him the love and the loyalty of his own people and the community they fought so hard to build. Surrounded by the ruins of this once thriving society, David was forced to come to terms with the extent of his folly. In the end, the once great village, reduced to rubble, laid in shambles. This is a story about the birth of that traveler. That's it. That's all I got. It might sound familiar. It might sound original, but I think it resonates for our current times. Back to you, David.
All right. Interesting. All right. And a great approach. Anybody recognize? It's not me, of course, that he's talking about here. And obviously, reference to the biblical David, but a different outcome there too. And of course, interesting about how the authority that he sought to glom onto was necessary for making the state a greater one. Eh? Okay. Well, I think we can all recognize where that's coming from. But okay, thanks to Darwin for sharing that one with us. And we're open to all those different approaches to the. You keep it relevant for us. You get a lot of leeway on this show. All right, I wanted to turn though. Maybe this is the best follow up of the many stories that I have. Certainly could have led us to the Israel stories, but I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. This is one you need to hear about sooner rather than later. This one I caught over the weekend. Ready for this one? Pastor indicted with Trump in Georgia. I didn't even remember this guy as one of the 19, but a pastor indicted with Trump in Georgia asks evangelical supporters for help. Of course, they're going to do something like that, but wait till you see the story this guy is compiling for himself. It's the Reverend Stephen C. Lee. Well, he says he was pastoring to people in Georgia after the 2020 election. The indictment says he was pressuring an elections worker. In case we don't get all the way through this, the long story short here is this guy essentially I don't know how the message got to him, but basically heard the story that Rudy Giuliani and others were telling, that Ruby Freeman and, I'm blanking on the other name involved here. It should never be far from my mind, but that the election workers in Georgia, Ruby Freeman and, I can't bring it to mind, but shoot. All right. Is it Shay something? I can't even remember. All right. Well, maybe it's in the story, but these are the two that were being targeted by Giuliani and others and pointed to in the infamous videotapes. Look, they're taking out suitcases of votes. Their votes. They're rigging the election, right? And they sicked everybody they had on these people. Well, I guess Reverend Lee here was one of the people who either took it upon himself or took the assignment of showing up at their house to try to pressure them. You need to confess. You need to confess that you rigged the election. Things will go much better for you if you just fess up, which means something when a pastor comes to you and tells you that, pressures you into a confession that's got some theological weight to it, supposedly. Anyway, so yeah, from the point of view of the law, he's of course illegally pressuring, harassing, what have you, election workers. But he's saying, oh, but I'm a pastor. I was ministering to them. I was looking for a way to save their soul from the crushing burden of the lies they were perpetrating. And now he's out there saying, I can't be prosecuted for exercising my religious liberty. He's actually going to try to Hobby Lobby his way out of this. This is a really incredible and creative, if somewhat stupid and worrisome, attempt to evade the law here. All right, let me give you the New York Times write-up version of it and cram in as much as we can before the end of today's show. Richard Fawcett is reporting here on the byline. The Reverend Stephen C. Lee is one of the lesser-known figures indicted with former President Trump in Fulton County, Georgia, on those 2020 election charges. But on Thursday night at an evangelical church near Chicago, for some reason, dozens of people held their arms aloft and prayed over Pastor Lee at a fundraiser, of course, where he was portrayed as an American hero and a victim of religious persecution. We're going to be talking about the weaponization of government against religion. There's that phrase again. Gary S. Franchi Jr., a host on the conservative online news channel, declared declared from the pulpit at Families of Faith Ministries in Illinois, Channahon, maybe? Illinois, sorry guys, at the start of the event. We're going to be supporting America's chaplain and religious liberty here tonight. He's not America's chaplain, but I guess he wants to be. Pastor Lee, 71, is a former law enforcement officer, so should have known better, who became a Lutheran minister and is currently head of a small church in Orland Park, Illinois, but he ended up in Georgia anyway for some strange reason. He says he has offered spiritual support to police officers, yay, and victims. They're victims? I don't know. But victims of something after some of the worst American tragedies of the last quarter century, including the mass shooting at Columbine High School in Colorado and the September 11th attacks in New York. Wherever there's a disaster, you'll find Pastor Lee, I guess. His lawyer, David Shestokas, maybe, has argued that Pastor Lee was doing something similar, engaging in pastoral activities, when he showed up in Georgia after the 2020 election. God told him to drive to Georgia, you see. There, he tried to meet with Ruby Freeman, a Fulton County elections worker whom Mr. Trump and his allies had falsely accused of ballot fraud, a conspiracy theory that ricocheted around the internet. At the time, Ms. Freeman was being barraged with threats and harassment. The indictment of Mr. Trump and 18 others on August 14th, and statements from Ms. Freeman tell a different story. They place Pastor Lee at the center of efforts to pressure Ms. Freeman into falsely admitting to election fraud, raising questions about why a Midwestern clergyman was so determined to make contact with an Atlanta elections worker. Pastor Lee has been indicted on 5 felony charges, including violating Georgia's racketeering law, and has pleaded not guilty. In his presentation on Thursday night, he noted he could face up to 20 years in prison for the racketeering charge alone. That's a death sentence, he said. It's not. It's a sentence that will carry you through until you're dead, but it's not a death sentence. They're very different. 4 defendants in the case have pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. The rest, including Trump, are still facing trial, perhaps sometime next year. In recent weeks, Pastor Lee's version of what he was doing in Georgia after the election has been gaining purchase in the Illinois evangelical community, as he and Mr. Shestokas have done numerous interviews with right-wing media outlets. Thursday's event drew roughly 200 people. Mr. Franchi, the MC, said falsely that the 2020 election, quote, was stolen right out from under every single American, except for the half that actually voted for what was the real outcome, but whatever. Meanwhile, YouTube will now flag this whole thing as election conspiracy stuff. Let's see. The gulf between the two narratives of Pastor Lee's time in Georgia says much about a country fraying along political and cultural battle lines, and as much as Mr. Trump, okay, I screwed up the whole line there, but says much about a country fraying along political and cultural battle lines as Mr. Trump, the most prominent of the Georgia criminal defendants, ramps up his campaign for a second term and continues to push the false narratives that the previous election was rigged. Dun, dun, dun. Pastor Lee, in a 2021 speech endorsing a pro-Trump candidate for Congress named Jim Marder, not murder, but Marder, said that he had largely refrained from getting involved in politics for much of his career, but more recently, he said at the time, something had changed. We're facing the extinction of America. So, of course, he had to drive to Georgia and pester, harass, and threaten an election worker. Confess, says the man of the cloth, or things will go very poorly for you. Oh, I don't know. Maybe in the afterlife, maybe right now, whatever. I don't know which one I was talking about. But what a defense. You're going to have to keep an eye on these guys hobby lobbying their way into overthrowing the government. Wow. Okay. Something worth keeping an eye on. We'll be right back after this.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Right, and time now for you to listen to Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right next. Coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. What do we have? Well, more discussion of that Trump second term story where he says it would look a lot like Vladimir Putin's Russia. Almost as if there was political union with Russia to own the globalists. Next.